So this is a question. This was asked before the stream started too. Basically just to do some comparison, or like ultimately I think it would be neat to do some comparative analysis. I think I would want to do a little bit of research for that, but comparing this to other programming games that we've played on Play by Play, because we have done a number of them, and Kyle lists Hack and Slash and Quadrilateral Cowboy. We also oh shit, what else did we play? I know that we've done a couple of other ones. But I am absolutely blanking. Hack and Slash is the one that I remember. So let's yeah. Rujasu, if you wanna sort of, if you guys have cool Opus Magnum gifts that you want to share, feel free. And if anybody in the chat is if the mods are not too overwhelmed to help out with that, I don't know how to make it just like to turn off the post monitors, but or the link monitoring. But yeah. If you don't want like puzzles spoiled, then just don't click on those links. But do click on those links because I'm sure they're all amazing. Okay, so this game versus like Hack and Slash. The thing that was interesting to me about Hack and Slash. Hi, Marcy. By the way, Marcy and I just published Cosmonet for iOS. It's up in the App Store now.
Yes, play Cosmonet.
So check out the new. We redesigned the whole game to be vertical. So the gameplay is all the same, but all of the interface has changed.
Except for the new secret hidden ending.
Yeah, Marcy snuck a secret hidden ending in there. I bet none of you will find it. Anyway, Hack and Slash was really interesting to me because it was so narrative. And that is unusual for programming games, and I think that is part of the idea behind that game, was like, can we take the idea of like a programming, a systems thinking, well, and not even systems thinking, like that was very much programming and like technical exploit sort of ideas, and present them in an adventure game context that is a more narrative experience. Not that that was highly narrative, but it had a lot of dramatic trappings, and it had like a real sort of arc of experience that, for example, a game like this, and this is true of the Zachtronics games that I've played, this is also more or less true. I mean, the Blendo Games one, Quadrilateral Cowboy is a super interesting case because it does a bunch of different things. It also like has a narrative. It is highly narrative in a different way, but it is also sort of like, here it is a progression of more complicated challenges, and your basic tool set is the same, and the like type of thinking that you have to do is the same as you go through. It just gets more and more complicated. It starts out simple, and then you are asked to sort of like tackle more and more. And that's very much the case in this. Like, again, there is narrative. There's a narrative trapping. But especially in Opus Magnum, it's very like to the side. This is really a puzzle game, and the puzzles are about this difficulty curve that starts off, you can learn, and then you can sort of get better at it, and the challenges get more and more complicated until just solving them, you're like intently staring at it for a long time. Two very different approaches. I mean, honestly, the reference that I would make for this game in particular is Lightbot. And I'm sure 100% sure that I've referenced Lightbot before on earlier shows, but not for a while maybe. So Lightbot is sort of a classic. I'm familiar with it as a classic mobile game. Oh no, maybe I played it in browser. It was a Flash game, I think, at one point. It has a very similar visual language that is not quite as complex, because Lightbot has much simpler mechanics. But you have a single little robot, and you can instruct the robot to move forward. You can instruct it to turn clockwise or counterclockwise. You can instruct it to jump, which it needs to do in order to climb steps. And you can instruct it to turn on and off lights, which it can do if it's sort of standing in the right place. And the idea of the game is that, very similar to this, you have a programming track that you fill up with symbols that sort of are a sequence of commands, and there's no sort of element of synchronizing, so there's no pacing or anything. It's just what is the order that you want it to execute commands in, and then it will move around, and you're trying to turn on all of the lights in each level, and the levels get progressively more and more complex, and then at some point it introduces loops, and I think it does proper loops no, it does function calls, so in an extremely limited way. So you get two programming tracks, and a command that you can use to call the second track, to execute all of the commands on the second track. So the trick at that point becomes sort of like, can you construct a loop of actions that is not necessarily the most efficient way to turn on just one light, but if you repeat that sequence over and over and over again, it will turn on all of the lights. So like, move and turn on a light, and then turn in the appropriate direction, and then you'll make like a little square or something. Very cool game. Love that game. It's very small and very short, and doesn't get terribly complex, but it's a very cool little programmatic thinking game. This is very similar to that, but like in complexity leveled up an enormous amount, and then in its presentation, in its packaging, and by packaging I mean everything from the polish of the game and the sort of like, these are the levels, the number of levels that we have, the difficulty progression, the smoothness of that difficulty progression, and the narrative that sits alongside the levels. Like, all of that is core game, and that is presented at a level of polish, which is fantastic. And then all of the secondary features that are specifically targeting the core experience of the game. And so this would be the ability to very easily create animated GIFs, the way that it tracks your stats and presents your stats in comparison to both your friends and a histogram of like all players, and the integration and like continued development, continued support and maintenance of these sort of ongoing content and user-generated content features, and how sort of nicely integrated all of that is into the package. None of that is core gameplay, right? Like you could develop the core game even with the narrative and have that be sort of just a thing. It's the addition of all of these features that emphasize what is particularly cool about this game that make the experience so much better, that really sort of level it up. I feel like this was a tangent off of another point. No idea. I guess the comparison of this to Lightbot. So this is both in sort of the core game, the sort of scope of that, the complexity of that, and also in the packaging of it, just like several steps above Lightbot. But that would be like my number one referent for this game. Like it's still it's the same core experience, just, plussed. As opposed to some of the other stuff that we've played. So Quadrilateral Cowboy, first of all, compared to other Zachtronics games, right, there is at least some kind of a difference in how they approach programmatic thinking and systems thinking. So this is not especially literal. The most literal of their games that I've played is well, actually, Shenzhen is also pretty damn literal. But TIS 100 is great. It is a programming game where you write code. And all of the interface is, alphanumeric. You type stuff out, and you run it, and it breaks, and you debug it, and it's very similar to this game, but instead of placing objects on a board, you're typing out words in boxes. Shenzhen has elements of that, and then is electronics. So it's the thing that I really like about Zachtronics games is that they have a very nice balance, and this has gotten better and better with all of their games that I've played. They have a really nice balance between the sort of programmatic thinking, the lightbotness of the sort of puzzle solving, and then a spatial element that enforces some sort of constraints on that puzzle solving. So in this, it's like the spatial element of arms can only be so long, and you can't have things overlap, and you can't have physical elements collide. And so you need to sort of create a clockwork mechanism where nothing is running into other things and that kind of stuff. In TIS 100, it's you're typing code into these little boxes, and each box is very, very small, and so you can only write so much code in each box. And if you want it to do something complicated, then you have to actually put that functionality somewhere else and pipe it over to where you want it. So there's there's a spatiality to the problem solving that you're doing that other games don't have in the same way. So I can't remember if we actually played Human Resource Simulator? Human Resource... what the hell was that game called? Was it Human Resource Simulator? No, that's not right. That's not right at all. Human Resource Machine. Thank you. Human Resource Machine. Again, it's the same sort of programmatic thinking, that is more about data transformation in that case than like some of these other games focus on. So like this game and Lightbot are both very much about robotics, really. They're about sort of like using instruction sets to move things around in a physical space. Human Resource Machine is about sort of getting input and transforming it into output in some sort of a desirable way. And that's a game that like is visualized in order to make it more accessible, but it is not spatialized. There is the space that they create, that they set that game in, has no effect on the actual gameplay. I guess I haven't played it on play-by-play. It's a really cool programming game, though. I like that one a lot. And then what are the other games that we've played? Quadrilateral Cowboy is spatialized in sort of a different way. It is a programmatic thinking game that is embedded in a explorable world, which I love that game. I'm kind of bummed that it seems like the gameplay was good, but it didn't have this kind of packaging, right, that this game has. It didn't have quite the full arc of experience, and it didn't have the sort of aftermarket stuff that this game is doing with the journal, and it just didn't seem to click for people in the same way. And then Hack and Slash had spatial elements, but unlike Quadrilateral Cowboy, and certainly unlike this game, that was I think my memory, my experience of Hack and Slash was much more linear. It was much more sort of I guess like this game, like Opus Magnum, here are a sequence of challenges that are essentially puzzles for you to solve. But instead of being presented, I really like how clean this game is. Here are all of the challenges, and here's the sequence that you're supposed to do them in, and here's sort of narrative that is to the side. Hack and Slash was very much about there was a kind of a pseudo game about moving from one challenge to the next, which wasn't cool. I mean, it wasn't bad. It was cool, and it had sort of an appeal to it. It gave it a relationship to the action-adventure genre and to a lot of popular games specifically, but it also didn't feel super elegant, and it also didn't feel like it was exploited as much as it could have been. Whereas the interface for this game, just the pacing, the user experience for this game is much simpler, but more elegant. Yeah, I loved Quadrilateral Cowboy quite a lot. Trying to remember if I'm trying to remember other games that we've played, because I know that we have done some programming games on this show. We've talked about this before. I'm gonna have to go back and review and sort of maybe I can write something up about some of the different stuff that we've played and thoughts that we had on it. All right, so Shaikendero had a question earlier, or maybe not a question, but pointing out that there are looking at a few of the solutions that I showed you of mine, I see a couple of inefficiencies caused by aesthetic choices. Your tracks are bigger boxes and spacing between elements. How do you think the aesthetic trade-off in this game compared to actual programming design patterns? Oh shit, that's a great question. This is wonderful. I mean, one of the things that's really neat about this game is that I feel like it takes sort of like it takes Lightbot, which does a great job of what it does and has a very clear relationship to programming, but that relationship is pretty one-to-one, and because of the metaphor, like you're programming this robot that moves around turning on lights, there's only so deep that it can get while maintaining that sort of one-to-one relationship, right? The metaphor doesn't map exactly to a programming language. And so if you wanted to do more complicated programming stuff, you would have to either break the metaphor or deepen the metaphor, really. Like, move away from sort of literal one-to-one representation of programming concepts. And Lightbot just doesn't like deal with that. It just sort of like stops before it gets to that point. This game, I feel like, takes that second road and says, at some level, this is very clearly connected to programming. You are writing out instruction sets for each of these individual mechanisms. But the complexity of the game is going to come from something that is not a like really direct map to programming. You are not going to be developing like classes or object-oriented paradigms, or you're not going to be dealing with recursion or like different types of loops. You're going to be dealing with very specific cycles, and you're going to be dealing with problems that are not specifically programming problems. You're going to be dealing with like the spatial problems that are caused by the constraints of the challenges. The cool thing about that is that how much of the experience of dealing with these challenges still mirrors the experience of programming, even though there's not the same kind of one-to-one relationship. And part of like a really good example of that is exactly as Shaikendera is pointing out. There are a number of conventions that are essentially considered desirable trade-offs in programming that are not about that point to moments when there are things that are more valuable than efficiency in a program, and often this will be this will present itself as a trade-off between some kind of very, very clever and efficient solution to a problem and something that is much more legible and understandable. Different programmers have different sort of like approaches to what is the most desirable balance to strike there. But that is a trade-off. Like, you can make things technically better, potentially at the expense of making them sort of easier to understand. And you see this in this game. And I think, like, from my own experience, without being part of the community and without having watched other people play it or really looked at other people's solutions to things, I think that there's probably a pretty common arc for individual players where your first solution to a problem is not going to be the most efficient solution, partially just because you construct it in a way that is easier for you yourself to parse, to understand. And then once you sort of have a complete solution, if your goal is to optimize it, then you can start to remove some of those sort of legibility features. So for one thing, like I have a tendency when I'm like sketching out the placement of things to put them further away than they need to be, to put like space around stuff, because that helps, that kind of grouping helps compartmentalize what each group of mechanisms that has sort of a shared function is actually supposed to be doing, which makes it easier to lay the whole thing out, and it makes it easier to debug when something is going wrong, to sort of be able to look at it and see it that way and trace things back to sort of what module they're a part of. But all of that spacing reduces efficiency in a couple of different ways. And so also temporally, like especially my early, well, no, all of them, all of my solutions, especially all of my first solutions. Oh shit. Okay. All of my first solutions will tend to like divide the problem, divide the thing that needs to be constructed into several distinct steps, and then sort of have a module, a physical module, spatial module that is dedicated to each of those steps, and have them just sort of like do the steps in order. Whereas it's often more efficient to find ways that everything can be kind of doing what it's supposed to do at once. And then, you know, you have things move faster. But it's easier to process, it's easier to sort of understand when you let it separate out. And then for me, there's a couple of parts to this, like if I am going for an efficiency solution, then often it's about sort of like constructing something that is modular like that, that is made out of pieces and that help me understand a sequence, and then modifying that, often in ways that involve like tearing it down and starting over, to construct something that is a little bit tighter, that is like based on the same principles, or based on what I learned from developing the solution the first time. How can I sort of implement that in a more efficient way? And then, like, once I've constructed that, I will see even more things that can be streamlined. And that kind of iterative process, I think, is very, I would imagine, is very, very common for individual players of the game, and also probably within communities of players who are optimizing solutions to this game. So, Taraka pointed out that somebody made a Turing machine in a custom puzzle, and that is totally fucking insane. I'm gonna have to look at that at some point. Yeah. So, PRNG0 sort of notes that, like, what I'm describing tends to be a local optimization, and that is not always gonna get you to a real optimum. Oftentimes, like, a real optimal solution to a problem needs to be designed sort of from the bottom up, or at least like the thing that first occurs to you, or the way of approaching a problem that I'm describing, where you sort of split it into parts and separate them out and have them each work, and then try to sort of like decrease the inefficiencies between them. That will get you to you will reach a point where that cannot be optimized any further, but there's some other solution that is based in a different, that has a different basis, essentially, that is more efficient or can be made more efficient than the solution that you have. And that's definitely true. That's very common in all kinds of systems thinking and programmatic thinking sorts of challenges in throughout computer science. I still do think that it's true that doing piecemeal work, creating these sorts of piecemeal solutions, and then working to decrease the inefficiencies in them can be a tool to understanding the sort of better designs, and often will come as a first step to then radically changing the solution in favor of something that has a stronger basis. And so you don't want to like over optimize a solution that you're eventually going to tear down and replace with something new. But I do think that there's value in exploring those solution spaces a little bit, because at least the way that my brain works, like that helps me comprehend the sort of the potential solution spaces that are going to be more efficient. Cool. In most cases, you're not trying to get to first on the leaderboard. Yeah, that's very true. I mean, that's generally true. It's also true for me in this game. Like, I'm definitely not. I'm not playing at a competitive level, but I enjoy. Honestly, I enjoy the process of putting these machines together, and then watching them work and seeing where they don't work and figuring out how I can fix the problems that are that they have. Yeah. Yeah. All very good. Can anybody else remember any of the programming games that we've played on Play by Play? I know some of you have been around for a while. I can only think of those two off the top of my head. I'm gonna have to check the YouTube page. Okay. So, anyway, there's some amazing... Yeah, I did mention Hack and Slash. That was one of the ones that I could remember. There's some great trivia in the chat right now talking about computer science concepts that have been implemented in this game, which sounds amazing, honestly. Like there's a ton of stuff in here. There's a ton of stuff that this is so tricky, because as we saw with Quadrilateral Cowboy, like there was functionality built into the game that allowed for user-generated content, but there was zero engagement with it, at least at the time when we played. And part of what I think this game is doing that's better is seeding that. So it sounds like some of the journal is it actually takes from user-generated content, but some of it is authored by the developer, and sort of creating all of that I think helps a community, an ongoing community, develop and prosper. And Quadrilateral Cowboy didn't really have that. This is also just such a sticky game. Like, as much as I loved the game and the narrative and the arc of Quadrilateral Cowboy, like the visuals and the GIFs, and honestly sort of the bite-sized levels in Opus Magnum are like just really, they're really sticky. They're really like they're shareable, and they're memorable, and they make it easy to recommend the game, and sort of this hypnotic image thing is like huge, is actually honestly I think a huge part of why Opus Magnum is doing well, which it seems to be. I mean, you know, God knows it was all over my Twitter feed when it came out, which is a lot of game developers and programmers, but enough of them were talking about this game that I think it made, you know, a reasonable splash. It's so easy to share it, just conceptually. It's so easy to like show somebody why this game is interesting, and I think that was harder to do with Quadrilateral Cowboy. I think that, you know, that game was had depth to it, but that depth was not, you know, really easily accessible. Nancy Drew does not really count as a programming game. Yeah. Okay. I think that's going to be it for me. Like I said, I did not get enough sleep last night, so I'm going to go home and go to sleep, which I'm looking forward to. Big thank you to Mr. Pants SC2 for subscribing to this channel with Twitch Prime. Very, very much appreciated. Let me plug a couple of things really quick. I mentioned Cosmonaut is out on iOS. It's not out on Android yet, but we're going to work on that. If you have an iPhone, you can download it for free. It's basically the same game, so like if you've already played it, then you've already played it. But tell your friends to download it on their iPhones, which is maybe a little bit easier to access than the itch.io page. What's the other thing? Oh yeah, Sunday. I know Zyvo was there last week, but on Jesus Christ, what's the name of it? It's up on here right now. Saving Throw. On Saving Throw, yes. Champions of the Earth, podcast produced by Jesse Vihill, my development partner, my colleague here at USC, run by Colin Kelly and featuring Mark Campos. Podcast that is very, very cool and you should all be listening to. Has a, if you like role-playing games and or like giant mechs, and or high school drama, they're doing a live show, two-parter. The first part was last week. It's on Saving Throw. The second part of it will be this Sunday at 5 o'clock Pacific time on twitch.tv/Saving Throw show. The VODs for last week are up. It is well worth watching. They all look amazing. They dressed up in it is a steampunk Victorian era like version of Champions, and it's super good. It had a unbelievable twist ending to the first part, and so the It will wrap up this week on Sunday. Check that out. Should be super fun. As always, thank you to everybody who came and hung out and like sat through me staring at molecules and mechanisms for an hour. I appreciate that. Appreciate you being here, asking questions, giving insightful commentary along with me. Thanks especially to people who have supported the channel. Of course, our fantastic moderators, and everybody who's subscribed and or donated bits. Really appreciated very, very much. If you love this community, then check out the other places where you can find folks on the Discord, the Steam group, on the forum, on the YouTube channel. Also, don't forget to listen to the podcast that comes out every couple of weeks and is very cool. Yeah, you're all awesome. This is great. I'm going to try to play Hitman again next week. So Mostly Walking is moving to Thursdays, which means that this show will not be on Thursdays anymore. I believe at this point, I'm pretty sure that Play-by-Play is going to move to Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Pacific time. And that will happen when Mostly Walking moves, which is planned to be 2 weeks from today. So in 2 weeks, there will be a Mostly Walking at this time. The previous Tuesday probably is when the first Play-by-Play at the new time will be. But check out my Twitter for up-to-date information and announcements of streams before they happen, like just barely. There is a podcast. It's called Feedback Force. And you can find a link to it, I believe, on this Twitch page down below the video. I think that's everything, everybody. Okay, cool. Love it. Wonderful. You're all fantastic. Have a great night. Moobot, I don't know what Moobot's doing. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. See you all next week. I will be in LA. I'm not going to be at GDC, so I will be doing at least some streaming next week. See y'all then. All right, have a great night.